Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Voice of Men 360. My name is Dipesh Khan, and Voice of Men 360, and I'm the social media coordinator. Voice of Men 360 is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 and is based in Toronto, Canada. Voice of Men 360 was born seeing a need for stepping up to provide services in men's and boys' life, and it has been a tremendous need due to ongoing issues that are happening in men's and boys' life, such as mental health issues, developmental issues. We are also part of International Men's Day. International Men's Day has been serving for over 21 years so far in many countries around the world, joined together and doing various activities. And International Men's Day follows six pillars, which is the overall well being of boys and men. And we follow the same footsteps. Now, today's show is based on human trafficking, and the title of the show is Men Ending Trafficking. And we are very glad to be joined by John Cassells. John Cassells is a human trafficking specialist with SIM Canada and the program director of Men Ending Trafficking. He's worked with various vulnerable and exploited young people since entering youth work in 1984. Over the years, he has designed and directed a variety of outreach programs, helping countless young people break free from addictions, homelessness, and the sex industry involvement. John provides consultation for other NGOs and church based programs, in addition to municipal, provincial, and federal government. Thank you so much for joining, John. I really appreciate it, and welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Depesh.
Hey, John. So yeah, let's get started here. I was doing some research on the topic of human trafficking, and I had no idea that it's such a prevalent issue in our community, and it definitely has long-lasting impacts on people. So just to get started, like, what exactly is human trafficking, and how much does happen in Canada?
Human trafficking is commercial exploitation when it involves coercion. So
Mhm.
you could say, well, I work a very difficult job and I feel like I'm not being paid enough. And I feel like I'm being exploited because I'm being taken advantage of, and the profits go into my employer's pocket and not mine. But the difference would really be, are you free to leave that employment and seek other employment? And so if there's coercion, and it could be threats of violence, it could be threats of violence to your family, it could be actual violence, it could even be locked doors where you actually physically can't leave. So these types of things, including kind of a psychological holds. So the process of bonding somebody to you through through essentially brainwashing. So the courts figure out often when human trafficking really is a factor, or what's really happened. But it's exploiting a person where they're really not free to make another choice. Um, and doing that for profits. In terms of how much we see in Canada, it definitely is a growing problem. It's always existed here. It's a form of slavery, in fact, and slavery's been with us almost the entire existence of mankind, we can presume. But if you look at Statistics Canada, they would say a city of 100,000 people. So if you
Mhm.
picture a city like Kingston, Ontario,
Mhm.
a city of about 100,000 people, 3 years ago, they were saying there would be one incident per year of human trafficking in Kingston, Ontario, statistically. Now they've bumped it all the way up to 1.5, 1.5. So maybe one incident one year and two incidents the next year. But is that really true that we've seen a 50% increase in human trafficking in that short period of time? Well, the Statistics Canada relies on certain information that is given to them by police agencies. There's an agency that does excellent work at looking worldwide in different nations at the problem, and they use a bunch of different matrices or metrics for understanding the problem of human trafficking. Conservatively, they estimate in Canada that we have 17,000 active cases at any given time of human trafficking. So that would be about 50 times higher than what Stats Canada was originally telling us. So a city like Kingston might have actively at any given time 50 cases of human trafficking happen. Statistically, the RCMP are telling us that upwards of 90% are sex trafficking cases. So the people being exploited are being used for sexual services in the sex industry, and that those people are young and female on average. So we have 2/3 of the reported cases of human trafficking are in Ontario. I don't know if that's more proactive policing, or if that's just that we have a stronger market demand for that kind of activity here. I believe it's both, but it's something that is impacting the lives of our young people. The average age of entry into the sex industry would be around 15 to 16 years old. So before their 16th birthday on average. It's generally young women. And it really is a problem that has multiple victims on average for every high school across the province. So if you think of if you have children in high school, almost certainly there's human trafficking victims actually who may be missing from school now, or may still be attending classes with some regularity, who are being exploited at least on a part-time basis. So it's very, very prevalent in our society.
Wow, like that's yeah, no, when you talk about it, right? It's not only having an impact on the victim themselves, but it's also having an impact on the family, on the community, and obviously, like you mentioned, the cases are probably underreported, right? Just by the nature of these things. So one thing you mentioned that like most of the cases are, related to the sex industry when it comes to human trafficking. So are sex work and human trafficking, similar things, or is there other kinds of trafficking as well?
Yeah. So certainly we do have somewhat of a labor trafficking problem here. The police are not discovering that to be a widely
Mm.
uh, experienced phenomena in Canada. So we're not seeing a whole lot of that. And I don't have the current stats, but it's something like, I don't know, 4% perhaps of the total of human trafficking that is
Mhm.
being discovered in Canada. So the vast majority is involved
Mhm.
in various aspects of the sex industry.
Mhm. And like you mentioned that a lot of it is like the age of entry is 15 and 16, which is pretty shocking because you're still pretty much a child at that age, right? And you are a child, yeah, like you're not even 18, right? So like and at that age you're still vulnerable, right? A lot of the and especially like younger girls, right? So if you look at that, um, if like from your work, for example, are you able to share like how something like this occurs, like what causes them to be trafficked, or is it like yeah, like what influences them? And yeah, if you can just share just from your own work, any of the stories or something you've seen, John.
Okay. So where we see trafficking, and particularly where it affects our young people from our communities, it is in the sex industry. And you'll hear lot of people refer to sex industry activities as sex work.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those activities are legal, and some
Mm-hmm.
of those activities are illegal. It is not legal for a minor age person to engage in any uh, sex industry activities, and that could
Mm-hmm.
involve stripping at strip clubs. It could involve um, sexual acts on camera online, and they call that camming.
Mm-hmm.
It could involve prostitution. It could involve massage parlor activities that involve more than massages. It becomes very sexual. Um, so there's those types of things. That it could include the production of pornography as well. Those types of activities, some are legal and some are not legal, but they and they are often called sex work, and it's odd to call some things that are illegal work because they're not work, and all of those activities are in fact inherently exploitative. So by nature, the industry itself is overrun by misogynist
Mm-hmm.
operators who do exploit. And I can give you an example of that. But it's important to know that there is a distinction, though those activities can be very exploitative.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they don't constitute human trafficking by themselves. There really needs to be third party coercion, and
Gotcha.
and that is the big thing. It becomes human trafficking when an individual's agency is taken away from them.
Yes, choice, right? Like choice, their free will, and almost sounds like a cult.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the human trafficking rings essentially are cults, and you're right about that. But yeah, let me just relate a story to you. Young people today are, through a variety of influences and through the media they're consuming, the music they're listening to, especially in the hip hop music scene right now, even the style at which and content by which the kids are receiving sex education in the schools. It is a sex positive, which sounds good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody should be sex positive, I think, right? So, but it's the sex positive movement that's come into our society and even in our schools that teach that all of these activities are value neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter what moral standards you grew up with. Things like pornography and prostitution are value neutral. So you should feel free to, and maybe encouraged to go and exploit those opportunities for
Mm-hmm.
your own gain. And so we have a lot of kids who are growing up in homes, um, often with religious backgrounds, various religions that teach, a lot about good moral
Mm-hmm.
behavior and how you guard your sexuality. And they're very willingly stepping into that arena.
Mm-hmm.
So so let me tell you about this one young lady that we helped. She had taken a couple of years off after high school and traveled and did some mission work, Christian mission work, and helped in orphanages and that sort of thing. She decided she was going to want to go to university and get a degree, and so she was working waiting tables in Toronto, and but it wasn't enough because cost of living
Mm-hmm.
was really cutting into her savings, and so a friend of hers who she met in a church youth group originally was into escorting and stripping. Well, escorting is kind of a very soft title for hotel prostitution.
Mm-hmm.
It has very little to do with what you imagine somebody escorting
Mm-hmm.
somebody else would be, what those activities would involve, and it's generally pretty quick. There's your money, and
Mm-hmm.
here's the sexual services, and they're out the door. And so she decided, well, I don't know if I want to get into escorting, but yeah, I think stripping would be fun. I don't think I have a problem with that at all. You know, so here's somebody whose parents raised her with certain ideals, and
Wow.
she so easily is willing to say, yeah, I'll give it a shot. I don't have a moral problem with it. And so the first night at the strip club, she went and she performed, and she was approached shortly after by a young woman when she went back to the change room. And this young woman said, my man wants you to be his girl, and he's got several girls, and he wants you to be one of them. And it's a really good opportunity for you, so you can be very, very successful. And this young woman said, no, I'm not interested. Are you talking like he would be my pimp? No, I'm just here by myself, and that's the way I'm going to do it. This woman then assaulted her physically.
Wow.
And so the young lady was very upset with her first night of stripping, you know, that she got beat up in the change room, and got in her car and drove to outside of Toronto to her parents' home. Her parents were not home. She did have a key to the house, but before she could get in the house, you know, a fancy black car pulled in behind her, and a large man got out of the driver's seat and stopped her from prevented her from entering the house, and said, look, I'm very insulted, and I had to drive all the way up here to talk to you because you were so rude. You wouldn't talk to me. You're going to work for me, and we're going to be very successful together. And she said, no, go away, get off the property. And he beat her very severely. And so you would assume then, if that's the way things happen in the strip clubs, and this is actually not an isolated case, this is not rare, you would assume this young lady would say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that all of this was part of the industry, the sex industry, and that even in the strip clubs, human trafficking is so rampant. So she decided, though, to go back into the club, and before she started stripping again, she would find herself a pimp who seemed nicer and friendlier, because she was going to need protection. That pimp, of course, as you would expect, turned extremely violent, very, very controlling, and she was exploited for a full year before she tried to escape through suicide. So here's a young lady from a very functional, very committed, caring family. She was unsuccessful with the suicide, reached out to her family for support, and primarily it was the parents, with our help as well, who were able to give her the support she needed to break free from this guy who really had such strong control, psychological control over her. So he was using psychological tactics, but also physical violence to hold her in the industry. And so almost 3 years later, she's still recovering, but doing phenomenally well. A lot of people don't get on their feet that quickly again after that kind of traumatic experience in trafficking.
Yeah, no, that kind of trauma definitely has to change a person and change their life. And it's like you mentioned, it's not only psychological trauma, but also you get physical trauma, and especially when someone that's young and impressionable, like that's gotta change their whole life. No, and that's amazing that you were able to help her out, and your organization was able to help her out, and I definitely want to talk more about that. So John, you work with SIM Canada, and you are a human trafficking specialist. So what does that look like? And when you're approached by that situation, like Jill, like you mentioned, yeah, just tell us more about your work, and how exactly you help someone like that.
Okay, yeah. So I entered youth work in 1984, um, and I had, as a young man, I had no concept of what went on in the sex industry. Certainly, nobody was using the term human trafficking, and we, as a society, generally looked at prostitutes and strippers as rebellious people or bad girls or whatever the case was. Um, but so through the years, I've of course encountered more and more cases of human trafficking. Um, in 2014, I joined SIM, having worked with a whole variety of agencies previously, and much of them Christian agencies. And SIM is a Christian mission organization with the purpose of working closely alongside local Christian churches. And so within that, I'm technically men ending trafficking is not part of my work with SIM, though I'm a board member for men ending trafficking. I run a project for SIM called Lifeworthy, and Lifeworthy provides frontline support for families impacted by human trafficking. So we have a small team. Fortunately, I'm blessed to have some very strong female leaders, even some survivors of human trafficking who are walking alongside us, and we're able to provide support for those families. We do a support group for parents whose daughters are being trafficked or have maybe are in the process of coming out of trafficking and healing from that. We also do frontline work with the young women as well, providing them the support and guidance and care and recovery opportunities that they require. Yeah, so that's our little project. It's very grassroots. I have been studying the issue of human trafficking since 2007, so a few years, about 14 years now, where I've been studying it, quite diligently and trying to understand what it is, how it works, and how we can best respond, both on the front lines, but also in terms of policy issues and working with governments.
Yep, no, that's amazing, John. And we definitely need more of that work in our community. And also, John, like as you suggest that, right, domestic like sex trafficking, it predominantly involves female victims and young female victims, right? So that would more or less make it like a women's issue.
Mhm.
But then you also started an agency called Men Ending Trafficking. You know, why would you encourage men to get involved in like a woman's issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what? There's a lot of female-led organizations in this movement that work to raise awareness. They work as lobby groups that work front lines with the young women, and those agencies are excellent. A lot of those agencies, if you're a man, there's probably no opportunity to even volunteer. Um, but when you look at the issue of human trafficking, um, and particularly sex trafficking, it comes out of the sex industry. Who are the patrons of the
Hmm.
sex industry? Who are the people who fund those activities? And I work with young women who, I mean, shockingly and so sadly, may have seen over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, literally thousands of different men service them sexually, and just shocking. But when I talk to them, I'll often say, I'll often ask them, um, how many of your clients, how many of the people that you saw in that context and provided sexual services for, how many of them are not men? How many of them are women? And normally they'll look at me in kind of a puzzled way and say, "What are you talking about? 100% of them are men."
Wow.
And so human trafficking can be an extremely lucrative enterprise to be involved with. And what we're told by police agencies in Canada is that if a pimp is any good at all at what they do, they're going to be making somewhere in the range of probably $250,000 gross per victim per year.
Per
Now,
victim. Wow.
they have a lot of expenses, but they can also uh, gamble a lot of money away with the other pimps. They can drink, at after hours clubs, a bottle service at the table. They can be wearing all kinds of gold around their neck, and they can be driving $100,000 sports car, and it's nothing. So they obviously can make a lot of money, but where does that money come from? Well, it comes from your customer base. It comes from the people who demand that service. And who is that? It's
Yep.
almost completely, entirely men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's men from all walks of life and from all communities in our towns and cities that we live in, right? So we're talking about police officers. Most of human trafficking victims have been forced to serve as police officers. Even social workers, 40% of human trafficking victims have been forced to service, and medical doctors or dentists or school teachers, or, you just name it. People from all walks of life put their money in, fund the industry that exploits young women through human trafficking. So we have an industry that is by nature very exploitative in itself, and even in cases when human trafficking may be absent, we still see young women coming out of that industry very traumatized, very depressed, often very suicidal, often drug addicted, or struggling with alcoholism. You add to that the violence, the dysfunction of human trafficking, and it just compounds, those difficulties. And so it's the men from our communities that fund this industry. So anybody who's participating in it that way is responsible. So back to your question, why would we want men to be involved in this women's issue? Well, when you think about it, we only have this problem, this women's issue of sex trafficking victims, because of what? Well, men.
Yep.
Men create this whole thing, and it's human trafficking is a byproduct of the sex industry. The parasites, who are the pimps, the traffickers, latch on everywhere in this industry. It's in stripping, it's in the massage parlors, it's in pornography, it's in escorting. It's right across the board. These parasites are everywhere there. As my story with the young lady illustrated, even in the strip clubs, which are legal and licensed parlors in our communities, legal and licensed, and yet a rampant problem with human trafficking. And so why wouldn't we want men, good men who are willing to stand up and have a voice and say, all of this got to stop. The sex industry activities in our communities are hurting our young women. And, men are going to have to man up and stop taking advantage of women. And so that's our message. And we, Men Ending Trafficking, it started out of me going to churches and congratulating the 2 or 3 men that got dragged in and are sitting in the back row. And I say, God bless you guys for being here. And thank you to your wives for dragging you in here to this women's issue. But it doesn't begin as a women's issue. It begins as a man's issue. And we need guys like you to learn about this and stand up and advocate. So these men then would approach me and say, where do I sign up? And we had nothing. So we created Men Ending Trafficking.
Awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. And like you mentioned, like that kind of trauma would definitely take away, a person's dignity, right? And I mean, in our society, we need both men and women to work together, for a cause, right? So it's definitely great for men to get involved in this issue and to raise awareness. Because I mean, myself, I had no idea about this issue, and so when I meet other guys or even my friends, and I can bring greater awareness about this issue with them. And so with men ending trafficking, how would you say that it engages in practical ways, for the need to end trafficking? Like, what are some of the activities that you would usually do? I think you mentioned church, but yeah.
Yeah, we primarily were formed to speak out against human trafficking and the root causes of it, and certainly to address the issue of male demand for women's bodies. And so that's kind of how it came together. Pretty soon we were called on by actual victims of human trafficking to provide protective services and logistical support. So it started with a young woman who was going to court in Peel region. She was deathly afraid. She believed she would probably be killed for testifying against her human trafficker in a court of law to tell the judge exactly what happened. Just felt that, she might not even get in the courtroom. She may be slain in the parking lot. And literally, that is the fear of quite a few of the young women who are subpoenaed. They want to do everything they can not to have to show up at the courthouse, and yet they're subpoenaed and they're legally required to go. And so we went with this young woman with a team of men and women. And in Men Ending Trafficking, about 40% of our volunteers are women, which we need. We need that support, and we're stronger as an organization for it. And we were just trying to figure out on the fly, how can we do this well? Out of that experience, which was very eye-opening and very successful, we put together a training program, and we have a system for going to court with young women and providing that service. And though we're not armed like some high level politician might have bodyguards, visually our men resemble a team of security officers that provide that close protection. We also found a need. Often young women are living in unsafe situations. Maybe they've been living with their exploiter, or maybe they're living somewhere where perhaps gang members who are involved in their exploitation will be dropping by and keeping an eye on them. They really need to get out, but it may not always warrant calling law enforcement, and sometimes the young women won't talk to the police or have anything to do with them. So we assess when it might be appropriate and helpful for us to come in as a team and actually move somebody out. So show up with a truck and load furniture and actually take them out to a safe location and make referrals to agencies who can provide the proper frontline support. We do not work front line in men ending trafficking, but Lifeworthy does, and many other agencies that we connect with do excellent work. So that's the sort of things that, that men ending trafficking engages with, and it's a great organization. But we particularly seek a male audience with our message, and we engage primarily men from local Christian churches, and we go where needed and do what we feel is appropriate for us to help with.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you know, it's literally like life saving, for someone, and you're literally like saving someone's life, from this kind of trauma and abuse. So I can definitely see it being very rewarding work that you're doing, and I'm really happy that we have organizations like this helping our community. Um, now, from our discussions, we know that this is predominantly women are the victims of this industry. But what percentage would you say that men are also victims in this industry or are trafficked?
There's not,
Yeah.
yeah, there's not a lot of clarity on that in terms of trafficking cases before the courts. I believe it's less than 2% when you're dealing specifically with this sex trafficking issue. So it's for each victim, it's a terrible tragedy. But the numbers of male victims of sex trafficking are extremely low in Canada. There's, if you can contrast that issue with say Cambodia, for example, or Thailand, you see a lot larger numbers, and especially of minor age boys and girls. But yeah, in Canada, we aren't seeing a lot of males who are victims of human trafficking. We do see more males in the sex industry who appear not to be victims of exploitation by traffickers, though. And so there's obviously physical differences, but also the male psyche is different than the female psyche, and we're just not seeing the same numbers, at least in Canada, of male victims of human trafficking. I believe the numbers are a little bit higher in some areas of the United States.
Gotcha. And do you think there's also enough public awareness that that men or boys could also be a victim of this industry, or do you think there needs to be more awareness about that?
Well, I think anywhere you go and hear a presentation and an awareness presentation about human trafficking, almost invariably you hear this happens to boys and girls. This happens to men and women. And in my experience, it's an anomaly when it happens in Canada. But it does happen. I know specifically of cases where it's happened, but it's negligible in terms of the volume compared to what we see with the young women.
Gotcha. No, and that's very enlightening to hear from me too, John. Now it almost sounds like it's a systemic issue, right? I'm guessing there's historical elements to it, right? So if you look at like legal measures when it comes to this industry, how has Canadian law has responded to the issue of exploitation in the sex industry?
That's really insightful, Depeche, because I think as a society we need to look at historically what's happened and the kind of the subculture of sex buyers that has developed over time. So historically, it's been legal for men to buy sex in Canada. In fact, prostitution until relatively recently was not a criminal offense. There were some laws that were brought into play related to the act of prostitution, but prostitution itself was legal. And so, for example, in 1985, it became illegal to solicit in public for the purpose of prostitution, and that went against the prostitute who was maybe soliciting out on the street corner or in a lobby in a hotel, for example. And it went to the buyer who's maybe pulling up in his car and asking, "Hey, what can I get for $100?" So that was a measure, but it wasn't based on the felt need to stop prostitution or protect anyone from exploitation. It was only to deal with prostitution as a public nuisance. So you can see, even at that stage, even up to that stage, how prostitution was viewed. It was a public nuisance, but we didn't really see that there was a problem with victimization. We didn't really, it was just some people in our society go that way, and it's no big deal. In 1997, and this is an important issue, in 1997, it became illegal to purchase sexual services with a minor. Okay, so up to that point, the prohibition on buying sex or having sexual contact of any kind with a young person was based on age of consent laws. Way early on, it was 12 years old. At the time in 1997, when this legal measure came in, it was 14. So up to that point, a man my age could go out and buy sex with a 14-year-old girl, as long as he didn't get caught talking about it in public. So, but the act itself of purchasing sex with a 14-year-old at that time, it's not that long ago. It's 25 years ago. That became a measure. There was a challenge to our prostitution laws that really got going in about 2007, 2008. And it was a law professor from York University that said, we have these peripheral laws around the issue of prostitution, although prostitution is legal. And if it's legal, people get to call it work, and they get to consider it a job, and they shouldn't be legally prevented from doing their legal work. And he was right on that. It was an odd thing that prostitution was legal at all, and yet it was. And so he said, so since it's legal, prostitutes shouldn't be prohibited from communicating in a public place, because they might do that to screen out potentially dangerous clients, and they might be less safe. They should be able to have a place where it happens. So to run a common body house, as it was called, that should be allowed, rather than going some random place that has no controls at all and is unfamiliar to you. That might be more dangerous, right? So maybe you should be able to have a brothel where it happens, with a tough guy at the door who might help you out if you're in a pinch. So brothels should be legal, and they're not. And he thought that was a problem for something that was legal, an industry that was legal. And also making money as a third party. You couldn't make money as a pimp. That was illegal. And but the law professor said, well, you might need somebody to drive you out to have prostitution with somebody, or you might need a bodyguard. You might need a manager, right? So anyway, our prostitution laws those laws were struck down in 2013. 2014, the federal government came up with new legislation that said prostitution's illegal right across the board. It's against the law. But they did a a thing that's, I think, thoughtful and at the same time a little bit tricky to understand. They said since most prostitutes appear to be exploited persons, maybe a legal immunity should be given to them in most cases. So there's a lot of cases in which a prostitute should not be charged based on her right to legal immunity in certain contexts. So we have a lot of confusion around that. We still have police officers that say prostitution is legal. The law says it's not. The criminal code says it's not legal for anyone. But you may not be able to proceed with prosecutions against the prostitute in normal circumstances because they're likely to be exploited people. So anyway, that's where we've landed. Is it helpful? Initially, we saw what appeared to be a certain portion of sex buyers stop, saying it's a criminal offense, I'm not doing it. But our provinces, so we have federal law, but it's really up to our provinces and our municipalities to implement the criminal code legislation and to enforce it, right? And we don't have a province or territory in Canada that has appropriately implemented it or enforced it. We've had very, very minimal enforcement. The message to the sex buyers has been essentially, we are protecting you. So keep going. We might come after you if you're buying sex with minors, but even that, we'll tell you how to get around those laws.
Wow.
Right? So it's been our Canadian society. You'll notice is very hypocritical in many ways. This is a glaring example.
Yep, and also, when you talk about province and territories, have you handled any cases, specifically like in the indigenous communities, or is it like a it affects every community differently? Like, have you noticed like certain communities are impacted by it more, and how are these communities impacted?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. There are some advocacy groups out there who believe they have a fairly accurate read on the demographics of trafficking victims across the country, and some will say 50% of the human trafficking, or at least the sex trafficking victims in Canada, are Indigenous women and girls. Some will say the number's even higher than that. I'm not convinced that that's true, although I do see evidence that Indigenous communities tend to be more vulnerable to the issue of human trafficking, to the issue of alcoholism, to the issue of drug addiction. We've had very little direct interaction with that. In my program with SIM, Lifeworthy, we've been working with some First Nations families. What we've been discovering too is a trend, a relatively recent trend that's very disturbing. A lot of the human trafficking and drug dealing that we see, of course, in southwestern Ontario is done by street gangs. So we're talking about gangs from Toronto's priority neighborhoods, and some of the gangs out in Peel region, some of the gangs in Durham region, and what we've been hearing more and more of is, and seeing evidence of in legal proceedings, is we see Toronto area gang members who are trafficking the native girls, the Indigenous girls and women from northern communities. So even going into the Indian reserves and bringing drugs and luring young women into the sex industry. And so that seems to be predominantly through Northern Ontario. The prevalence of traffickers seems to be young men coming from the gangs of the Toronto area. So essentially preying on communities that are more vulnerable than average, and using often drugs or alcohol as a lure. So it's very, very disturbing.
Wow, that's definitely, a larger issue at hand, and it was definitely enlightening for me, to gain this knowledge. Just the last couple of questions, John. So when you think about the current laws, how effective are the current laws, and how would you correct the problem?
Well, it really needs to be dealt with provincially and at the municipal level. So we have, for example, Toronto continuing to license massage parlors that were always intended to be houses of prostitution. The city knows that that's what's going on, and they continue to work in concert with a lot of these bad actors who are running illegal brothels under the name, body rub parlor or a holistic center. Not all the holistic centers are houses of prostitution. Certainly, all of the 25 body rub parlors are, and the city has been continuing to support that. A lot of the strip clubs have illegal prostitution activities happening in VIP rooms, and the city continues to license and turn a blind eye. Not just the city of Toronto, but we see it in Vaughan, we see it in Peel Region, Durham. But the province of Ontario has taken notice of the issue of human trafficking, and they've put a lot of money into it, and they've created almost an industry in chasing the bad guys and locking up the traffickers and helping the victims. What they haven't done is they haven't in any meaningful way discouraged those who fund human trafficking. And so this is a problem because they're doing nothing to stop or slow down the volume of young people being lured and recruited every year into this industry by the thousands in Ontario. And if you could say, well, you'll never end prostitution, so why would you try to do that? Well, I don't know what the number is if it's 10,000 young people who newly enter the sex industry in Ontario every year. I don't know what the number is, but it's large. But if you could decrease that number by 20%, 30%, 40% through proactive policing, through proactive law enforcement, through prosecuting the men who buy sex, which is exactly what the prostitution laws are intended to do. They're intended, the prohibition on buying sex is intended to defund human trafficking primarily, and they're not doing it. So the province is putting a lot of money into enforcement, but they're chasing after the pimps. Who are the pimps? The pimps are the guys from the hood who want to be known as real bad guys, who want to be known as criminals, who probably need to be arrested from time to time, maybe need to do a little jail time here and there to gain their street cred. Do they care about the laws and the chance of being arrested? No, it's part of the game for them, and it is a game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The men who buy sex cannot afford to get arrested. There's studies out there that indicate that just initially, if the police got serious, and in jurisdictions in the United States where the police have gotten serious about arresting sex buyers, right away, 25% roughly of the sex buyers completely stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a 25% reduction for the product. And who's the product? They are the kids from our neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm.
15-year-old kids. So a 25% reduction, oh, that doesn't solve the problem, but it stops a lot of young people from being victimized right away. Do we care about that? We don't as a society, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem. And if you continue on that vein, year after year after year, that 25% grows and grows. So there's a greater reduction. In
Mm-hmm.
Sweden now, there's a tremendously where they've had a moratorium on buying sex for just over 20 years. Uh, they've decimated the prostitution industry and thereby have almost completely eradicated their society from human trafficking related to prostitution. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that commitment here. So we have reasonably good laws, somewhat confusing,
Mm-hmm.
but the big thing is they finally make it illegal to buy sex, and our provinces and municipalities thumb their nose at it, and we're
Mm-hmm.
losing the battle.
Well, yeah, no, there's definitely need to be more awareness of this issue, and I think there's definitely need to be more, like greater enforcement of some of these laws and even changes to these laws, and definitely need of more resources from the government, and more, I can see like policies change and a lot of this involvement. I really want to thank you, John, for being on the show today. For everyone that's listening here, it's the website is menendingtrafficking.ca. And if you have any questions for John, if you want to reach out to John, the email is info@menendingtrafficking.ca. Thank you so much for being here, John. I look forward to having another conversation with you and looking forward to making positive changes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Depeche, and I'm just very thankful for Voice of Men and all that you guys are doing. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks.